Hey, good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to Single Malt TV. I'm Rob Draper, and today I'm joined once again by one of the most experienced and respected voices in the Aussie and international whisky world, Andrew Derbidge. Andrew has been chairman of the Scotch Malt Whisky Society in Australia since 2005, where he's responsible for selecting the Society's single cask, single malt whiskies imported from Scotland for its members. As state manager for New South Wales, he also hosts the Society's member events in Sydney. Beyond the Society, Andrew is one of the country's leading whisky educators and consultants. He's been presenting whisky education and appreciation courses for more than 25 years and is whisky lecturer for the WSET, the Wine and Spirits Education Trust in New South Wales. He's worked with many of the major whisky brands in the world, including the Macallan, Highland Park, Glenfiddich, Balvenie, Johnnie Walker, Glenlivet, Glenmorangie, and Ardbeg, and he's personally visited more than 100 distilleries across Scotland. As if that isn't enough, Andrew is also an award-winning writer, named Best Spirits Writer by Australian Gourmet Traveller Wine Magazine, and is the creator of Whisky and Wisdom, a globally recognised online whisky resource that's earned multiple Icons of Whisky awards for Best Whisky Communicator. In 2022, in recognition for over 2 decades of high-calibre work in the industry, Andrew was inducted as Keeper of the Quake, one of the highest honours in Scotch whisky. Now, I could go on, but I'm not going to. I think it's time to get Andrew on, and he's standing by here somewhere. Let me see if I can find him. And there he is. And g'day, Andrew.
Hello, hello, Rob. Would you believe my camera's frozen? So,
oh, what?
After all the technical difficulties, and I apologise for the listeners who viewed in for the second time. We had a shocker trying to do this the other day. You and I were doing a test just 10 minutes ago. Everything was working, and for some reason my camera's decided it wants to freeze now.
Yeah, that's bizarre. And we did a test yesterday as well.
We did indeed. I suppose one positive out of this is that at least my voice is in sync with my lips at the moment. Yeah. So look, we should keep going. I'm going to try and play around in the background here whilst we talk. I'll see if I can multitask and do 2 things at once and get this fixed. But in the meantime,
see if you can boot it. And in the meantime, we'll do a podcast. Well, I tell you what,
that's right.
The best place to start is after last week and following on from the live stream I did with Tim Duckett at Heartwood. I got a lot of questions about the Aussie industry. You know, people wanted to know, how big it was and how much export there was, and because a lot of people all over the world can't find Aussie whiskies. So that's probably a good place for us to start. I remember when I launched Single Malt TV back in 2005, the Aussie industry was just sort of making inroads into the global stage, and it seems to have just taken off. So what do you think about it? The speed at which it's grown and how it's sort of worked its way into the whiskey world and won tons of awards at the same time.
Yeah, well, it's very interesting. It's very difficult to pigeonhole the Australian whisky industry. It's because it has many forms. It's a country. We have some large distilleries. We have many small distilleries, and it's a very changing landscape. And I think it's in an interesting place at the moment. And to be fair, we've been saying that for 30 years. Every 30 years we say, every 6 months, it's in an interesting place right now.
Yeah.
What changes is what's interesting about it. I did a quick stock take the other day and found 142 Australian distilleries, whisky distilleries. And of those 142, very few of them are exporting to international markets. There are plenty who would like to, but that's a very difficult task at the moment, made all the more difficult with some of the geopolitical stuff going on right now. those that had their eyes on maybe the US market are now being hit with tariffs and so on. So it's awkward from that point of view. And we have a lot of distilleries that are very, very small, what we would call a mums and dads operation, husbands and wives and couples who if they're lucky, might only be producing 3,000 to 5,000 litres a year. So
yeah, well, I've got those pictures that you sent me. I should run them, eh?
Yeah. Good idea.
Yeah, you can see that, right? That's amber.
Yeah. So look, that's not an atypical setup for many Australian distilleries. That's Amber Lane in New South Wales, about an hour and a half's drive north of Sydney. You can see they've just got the ones there, so they will do the wash still and the wash run and the spirit run in the same still. They're reasonably new on the block. I think they established about 7 years ago.
And then Bakery.
And
one
of my favorite, Bakery Hills. Now, Bakery is one of the longest standing ones. They set up in Melbourne in 1999. So they're considered one of the veterans of the industry.
Yeah, and that's their main still, right?
It is. They've got a second one on the way. But another great example of a distillery that started small and kept things small.
Yeah.
But now set themselves to expand. That's a name that most people will know. That's the Lark Distillery. I took that photo there, this one in 2015. So Lark's changed a bit since then. But yeah, Lark, obviously Bill Lark being very famous for being one of the very early pioneers of this new modern era. And Bill's work was very, set the ball rolling in many ways.
Yeah, and when you sent me these pictures, I thought you were sending me pictures of little sort of demo setups. I didn't realize these were the actual distilleries. And I mean, when you think of you think of something like Glenmorangie, which is heavy industry compared to this. This really is boutique whiskey making.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do have some larger players. Another favourite distillery of mine, Launceston, down in Tasmania, actually in an old airport hangar. So you get a sense for some of these setups. Very, very small. We do have some larger players, but when you say the Australian whiskey industry, you can't really pigeonhole it. That's Old Kempton, formerly known as Redlands. And again, just look at the size of the stills there. It's very small. You want to talk about a craft distillery and doing things by hand and using old craft methods. A lot of Australian distilleries fit that description.
Yeah, and when we were talking about it earlier on, and you sent me that map, we should have a look at that, eh?
That's a great image to bring up. Absolutely.
Yeah, hang on, let me find that. Here it is. Yeah, that thing's a classic.
Yeah, so people may not appreciate just how big Australia is. So you can see there Australia superimposed over Europe. I've highlighted Scotland in yellow, so you can get a sense of that. So our east coast and west coast are a long way away. So if you try and pigeonhole, well, what does Australians whiskey taste like? What style does it have? You need to appreciate that the people maturing whiskey on the east coast are in a very, very different environment and climate to the west coast. And Tasmania is the island down the bottom there, the bottom right. It almost looks like an upside down triangle.
Yeah.
Where Bill Lark and some of the early people set out, and there's obviously, well, not obviously, but there is a concentration of distillery in Tasmania, and particularly around the Hobart area.
Yeah, I've got another map here. I'll just bring this up. I borrowed this from the Whisky Academy in Tasmania, so I hope they don't mind me using that. But I thought it was a great indication of where everything seems to be concentrated, like over in Rutherglen, near in South Australia, and then seemingly around Melbourne, and then down in Tasmania.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of red dots missing there.
Oh, are there?
there's a lot more than these days, particularly in Tasmania.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. I mean, so this modern era, a quick bit of history without boring, but Australia was making whiskey all through the 20th century. It was outselling Scotch, but that was because of some rather punishing tariffs that were in place. Those tariffs got removed in the 1960s, and all of a sudden, imported Scotch whiskey was far more attractive and appealing from a price point of view.
Outselling Scotch in Australia, you mean?
Correct. I'm sorry. Forgive me. Yes.
Yeah.
It was Australian-made whiskey was outselling Scotch in Australia.
Yeah.
And those tariffs got removed in the 60s, and that changed the playing field. And then we saw a decline with a lot of distilleries starting to close, and by the mid 1980s, the last one shut down, and our industry was dormant and silent and dead for a few years till our friends in Tasmania started up again, and that was 1992. There or thereabouts, give or take a year. There's a bit of clouded history there.
Yeah.
Well, and in 1990, sorry,
the fact that the industry is so small and it's so spread out, does it sort of give it a bit of an advantage in terms of the global economy? Because when I was talking to Tim the other day, he said that being a small boutique style gives all the Australian distilleries the opportunity to adapt to global changes much faster than obviously the Macallan or one of the big companies in Scotland. And do you find that's the case?
Oh, look, as I say, I think it depends. A lot of these distilleries are extremely small. Some of them, their route to market is going down to the local market, literally the market, the community market stalls on a Sunday morning. So I think if that's your market and you're standing behind a stall on a weekend and selling 2-3 bottles over the course of a couple of hours, then what's happening in the bigger scheme of things probably doesn't impact you too much. But every distillery needs its grain, and there are pressures on grain costs. Every distillery needs power, and there are rising costs with power and certainly fuel. And every distillery needs wood, and the market and demand for casks is a changing things, particularly the few distilleries, and they're in the minority, that source their casks from the US. That's possibly a talking point at some point today.
Well, that must be getting a bit expensive at the moment.
Well, very, very expensive. And a lot of Australian distilleries opt to mature their spirit in ex-Australian wine casks. Obviously, we have a very vibrant and huge wine industry.
Yeah.
A lot of them go for fortified casks, and that's a shrinking industry. Not many people are drinking port and sherry anymore. A sherry made in Australia is called a Pera. So there's a few Pera casks around, but they're getting hard to find as well. So there's a lot of forces internationally, but some distilleries can pivot easily and quickly, and others less so.
Yeah, and one of the things I was discovering when I was sort of reading up before we did this last week is that a lot of the distilleries are experimenting. They're doing a lot of experimentation with different woods and different types of aging and that sort of thing. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Well, oh God, how do you do this without boring everyone? I guess you need to appreciate every distillery is different, and Bill Lark in particular was a wonderful ambassador, and was one of the first things he was the first guy in Australia to make a commercial fist of it. Other people were distilling whiskey, but struggling to get it anywhere. And once Bill stumbled across his method and sorry, not stumbled, that's doing him an injustice. He and Lynn worked at that for 10 years and put a lot of hard work into it. But once they sort of hit their straps, that model then got repeated by a lot of other distilleries who copied almost everything. Same methodology, same fermentation, same stills, filling into the same, and that was all around the this as I say, this hard area. And a lot of people would then take that method and use it at the distillery they set up somewhere else, and find that, well, hang on, I'm now in a different microclimate, or I've got a, so I'm
I get
maturing in
you.
a different area,
Yeah.
and the like. And so a lot of distilleries suddenly had to say, well, hang on, that I can't do what the Scotch, what they're doing in Scotland, because it's totally different environment. We can't copy what they do. What was working for Bill isn't working for me here. And so a lot of them were then having to, experiment and put their spirit into different casks. Some of that was by choice. Some of it was by necessity. Some of these small operations would just get their hands on what they could get their hands on, throw stuff into all these different woods. You're starting out from scratch, and then you'd find out 2-3 years later which cask types worked for you and which ones didn't.
Yeah.
A lot of distilleries started filling into very small casks, 20-litre, 50-litre casks, and found mixed results. It worked for some and not for others. What they also learnt was that you couldn't keep it in the wood for too long. And we've now got distilleries that have a bit more backing and are playing a longer game to lay their spirit down in larger casks, 100 litres and 200-litre ex-bourbon barrels. So there's always experimentation, and people are experimenting with yeasts. One of the great strengths and features of the Australian industry is we're not shackled by the limitations of the Scotch Whisky Association. So we can do things a little differently, and many people are. Look, and that's one of the things why I say it's in an interesting place, because there's a lot of interesting things going on.
Yeah. Is there there's no time limit on how long the whiskey's got to age? Is there, or did we? I think
it's 2 years in Australia.
2 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
So once the stuff is in the cask, it seems to me that there's a lot more variation in temperature in Australia. So does that sort of work in kind of force aging the whiskey with the variation in temperatures?
Look,
what I'm getting at is, like, in the rick warehouses in Kentucky, the bottom of the warehouse could be, say, 30 degrees Fahrenheit, and the top could be 150, and they rotate them around so that they're getting all this forced maturation. And does that sort of apply with the variation in temperature in Australia?
Yeah, I don't think too many places are doing it, US style and moving casks around in the warehouse. But there's certainly tremendous variances. Sorry, by the way, I am still playing with my camera, which there I'm trying to get things back on with.
Yeah, I'm trying. Oh, hey, hello. Oh, there you. Oh, look, your mouth's moving.
I'm back, but I'm a bit laggy.
I'll just keep
anyway.
talking.
Is that an improvement? I don't know. So yeah, look, some distilleries, particularly in the Hobart region. Hobart is unusually dry, not very humid, and that's right down in the south, as you can see there. You go up to some of the distilleries in the far north of New South Wales, and totally different climate, much more humidity and the like. By the way, I can see there's a big lag between. I'm buggy. Should I keep the camera off?
Yeah, no, I think leave the camera on, because David Legoff said that the frozen screen was a bit disconcerting because it looked like your eyes were following him around the room. So it's probably better to have you moving.
I learned that trick from the Mona Lisa. Yeah. So what were we talking about? So some distilleries they've got to manage their maturation to their climate and their area. Legally in Australia, the whiskey's got to at least get to 2 years. What that means is 2 summers. And so some distilleries have had to get very strategic about the size of cask they fit into and when they fill it. There's been a few distilleries that found that their whiskey got to 2 years old, but it was that second summer that took it just a bit too far when they were filling into small casks.
Oh,
So
right.
those that were filling into 20-litre and 50-litre casks were getting a very dark and what a seemingly aged product at 2 years. But they exhibited this thing that I call, they were over oaked but under matured, massive oak influence, but just hadn't spent enough time in the wood for that full process to play out. Maturation's a three-pronged process. It's subtractive, it's additive, and it's interactive.
Yeah.
And if it's only in the cask for 2 years in a small barrel at 20 or 50 litres, a lot of these whiskies were coming out very hot, very dry, extremely tannic, particularly the distilleries that had filled into French oak and casks from the ex-wine industry. So you had French oak, which has got more tannin in it anyway, filling into a cask that was ex-port or ex-sherry, getting the tannins out of that. And a few distilleries probably didn't do themselves a favour by releasing this whiskey at just 2 years old, and announcing themselves on the world stage with whiskey that drew criticism from plenty of quarters. I think we've learned from that. A lot of distilleries played that hand between 2018 and 21, 22. And they've since learned from that. And a lot of them are now moving to larger cask maturation, which allows you to put it down for longer in these hot climates, and get a much better product out the other end.
Yeah. Is that a bit of a problem, that aging for longer periods of time, because they're producing such small quantities? You would think that they've got to sort of rush it out to market a lot quicker.
Well, this is the tension that every distiller has. Obviously, you need cash flow. You want to get your product out there. How much forward to keep back, and how much do you need to take to market at the point to keep things ticking over? So every distillery has that tension. Having all said that, I want viewers to think every Australian whiskey gets bottled at 2 years. I'll say most, and I don't know how accurate that is, most of the distilleries, are now putting out stuff anywhere between 4 and 6 years, with great results. There's exceptions to every rule, and we've got the likes of Hellier's Road and Sullivan's Cove putting out stuff in the 20s. Both those distilleries have had whiskies with 20, 21, 22-year-old age statements on them. So we can do it, but obviously those casks that reached 20, 21 years old had to be nursed very carefully, kept in the right environment, and those distilleries managed that process very well.
Yeah, well, talking about the industry, specifically in Australia, we were talking the other day about how the global market is changing, and is it changing more? Are young people turning away from whiskey more in Australia than they are here? Because I was reading an article that said that as young Australian drinkers are moving more away to mixed drinks that they can buy in a can, rather than going to like whiskey and tequila and vodka and stuff like that, but primarily whiskey. So do you find that young people are moving away from whiskey? Whereas, back in, again, when I launched Single Malt TV, it was booming, and drinking whiskey was a status symbol almost.
Yeah, look, there's definitely some truth. I chiefly for the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, but some other organisations as well. We've definitely seen a change in demographic. We used to hold events and have a lot of people between the age of 25 to 35 there. They've disappeared a little bit. That's mostly due to financial pressures, I think, rather than what their palate likes. It's an interesting thing. I think, I don't know, I can't speak for other countries. In Australia, we used to have a bit of a rite of passage. You turned 18 and you went out with your mates.
Oh yeah, I know all about that.
Yeah. And a lot of people may not appreciate this too, but Australia is the second largest market outside the US for bourbon. We're a huge bourbon market, but
is that right?
Well, it is that. Right, but we drink it with Coke. So
there's a massive,
there's a massive RTD market for pre-mixed bourbon and cola. And that used to be a big thing. So, you'd turn 18, you'd go with your mates, someone would grab a cheap bottle of bourbon and the 2-litre bottle of Coke, and away you'd go. Similarly with rum, we've always had rum was actually currency here in Australia back in the 19th century. So we're big rum drinkers, and we have a very famous brand here, Bundaberg rum. So everyone, turns 18, goes out, has a night on the bourbon, a night on the rum. Doesn't end
Actually,
well.
I've heard people in America raving about Bundaberg rum.
Yeah, well, there you go. There's a market for everything.
Yeah.
No, it's great stuff. But everyone has that experience, goes out, has a big one. You wake up feeling terrible the next day and touch brown spirits again for 5 years, and we all sort of come back brown spirits maybe in our mid-20s and dive in again. It's an Australian thing. We do unfortunately have a bit of a binge drinking culture in the late teens and early 20s. We're living in an era at the moment where cost of living is very high. We've got high inflation, rents and mortgages are up, and people are being more careful where they spend. And if you walk into a bottle shop and there's a bottle of single malt for $70, or there's some ready to drink or an alcoholic soda at $20-$30, well, what are you going to reach for? So I think financial pressures are steering what younger people are spending their money on. Would probably be a better way to put it. I don't think palates have changed so much. It's if you're 19 or 20, what can you afford to drink? And it's brown spirits, and particularly single malts, are not in the cheaper category of drinks.
Yeah, and they're getting more expensive too by the minute, especially given the what's going on here in the United States with the cost of bourbon casks.
Yeah, well, it comes back to what we said earlier. Every single part of the supply chain is under pressure, and so everything is getting squeezed, and dollars are going up, prices are going up, I should say.
Yeah.
And eventually that hits the retailer.
Well, tell me a little bit about we were talking about whiskey tourism, and it seems to me that Australia would be a great place for whiskey tourism, but it's a long way away from the majority of people who would want to travel there. Although they are going to be in May in Tasmania at David's malt stock down under. But you've done a lot of tours, and what do you find? Is Australia a whiskey destination?
Yes and no. There are. I can't really think of, with the exception of a couple of the distilleries in Tasmania. Very few Australian distilleries, like almost none of them, have got a visitor centre. Hellier's Road does, and one of Lark's distilleries is better equipped. By the way, that's a photo of some Australians I took to Scotland. Well, that's 2009.
Up
that
on
photo. I've done that. Yeah, up on Orkney.
Yeah,
exactly. That's the one. Yeah. So every 2 or 3 years, I would lead a tour to Scotland for the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, taking 9 or 10 people along. And Scotland's whiskey tourism industry is set up fantastically. I think was it 1969? 1969 was when Glenfiddich opened their visitor centre. Glenfarclas did something similar in 1973. So they've been at this for quite some time.
Yeah, and some of the visitor centres are sensational too.
Oh, they're incredible. They're amazing experiences. And as I say, there's only 2 or 3 distilleries in there that would have a visitor centre per se. That's not to say you can't visit them. A lot of them offer fantastic visitor experiences. And this is when I said yes or no earlier. If you can, for the distilleries that can accept visitors, you can have an amazing experience, because particularly for the ones that are very small, if Mr. and Mrs. Smith run the distillery, well, it might be Mr. Smith or Mrs. Smith that takes you around.
Yeah.
And you actually see it very firsthand, talking with the producer and the master distiller at the same time. So that's one of the advantages of being small and nimble.
Yeah.
So there are distilleries that if you get online and ring ahead and make an appointment, they'll very happily show you what they're doing. So you can have an amazing experience, but just don't go in expecting the same thing that you saw when you visited Glenfiddich one year, for example.
Yeah.
It's a different setup.
The thing is, for people who make a trip, say people who make a trip from Europe to Australia, as we were saying when we're looking at that map, it's not an easy trip to go around. Like in Scotland, you could go around and visit, 20 distilleries in a day almost, but you wouldn't be able to do that in Australia.
No. Well, look, there are some distilleries that are closer to our urban centres. A lot of people fly into Sydney or Melbourne or Perth. They seem to be the main gateways. And there's some distilleries not far out of Perth. We have a few here in Sydney's metro area, and certainly a few just outside of it. I think Bakery Hill in Melbourne have actually set up a new split. They just moved recently to new premises. They've got a really nice little visitor experience there. And of course, if you can get yourself down to Hobart, well, there's dozens within a short drive of Hobart CBD.
Yeah,
So,
in a way, Tasmania is a little bit like the Aussie version of Isla.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing that the tourism side of it brings up is festivals and the like. And you were mentioning that festivals and tastings and masterclasses and everything are in a state of flux as well. And what were you getting at with that?
Well, I don't know if this is a uniquely Australian thing or not, but it's a crowded space, and certainly with festivals, we started to. This sounds ridiculous, but to have too many, and they started to cannibalize one another. There are various operators who run whiskey festivals and whiskey shows, and some of them are quite commercial ventures. Some of them are run by a retail shop or group that puts something together. But you've got like Whisky, for example, a very well-known international brand is here. They started here in 2009. David Ligoff, who you had on the other day, through a shop he was running at the time, World of Whisky, put together a whiskey show. That's myself and my very very good friend and colleague Susie Torres, representing the Scotch Malt Whisky Society that was the Whisky Show at Mascot back in about 2013 or 2014, I think. David Ligoff,
right.
If you're watching, you could probably
confirm. You sent me all your old pictures.
Well, the trouble is when you're standing behind the stand, it's hard to take a photo of yourself,
I know.
Talking.
Yeah.
I don't have to with me behind the stand, but anyway.
Well, what are you finding that because during COVID you had to go to virtual tastings and stuff because no one could get together, and the same thing happened over here and in Scotland. But are you finding that has rubbed off onto everyone now, and they don't want to actually attend master classes and tasting sessions?
Look, there's a bit of that, but getting back to where I was just heading a moment ago. So Whisky Live came along, and then Whisky Show, and then in Sydney we had Whisky Fair, and then in other states we had things like Whisky Freedom, Whisky Dreams. The Queensland Malt Whisky Society put together their show, and all of a sudden we went from having one big whisky festival that sort of made its way around the capital cities to having many. And I don't think it was a question. The problem wasn't so much consumer fatigue. But the trouble is, if you're a producer, if you're a supplier, if you're a distributor, and someone knocks on your door and says, "Hey, we're having a big whiskey festival. Can you please man a stand and supply stock for the weekend?" If you only got that once a year
and pay us $10,000
and pay us to take out a stand, if someone only approached you once a year, you'd happily do that. As I said, there's been some cannibalization now. With so many whiskey shows, you've got 10, 11 different entities all approaching the same suppliers, the same distributors, the same big brands, and saying, hey, we've got a whiskey show or a festival coming in a couple of months, could you man a stand and supply stock? And by that stage, by the time you're the third or fourth entity to come along and make that request, that company's already blown its marketing budget for the year.
Yeah.
So what we found is these whiskey festivals and shows would still go ahead, but there was just less and less different brands being able to support them and be present.
Yeah.
And so, you put on this thing, and just for the sake of the conversation, let's call it whiskey show. You put a whiskey show on, and you'd have to go out to other spirits like rum and gin suppliers just so you could get enough stands on. So as I said, it self-consumed itself here in Australia by having too many shows, and they weren't competing for punters to walk in the door. They weren't competing for consumers to turn up and drink. They were competing for the brands to be present at their show.
All right.
And so people would turn up, they'd get there, oh gosh, the big brands aren't here. I wanted to come and taste all these brands, and instead of this many, there's this many. And they would stop turning up for that reason, because it just wasn't worth turning up to go to a whiskey festival and then find that half the exhibitors were rum and gin producers, for example.
Yeah.
So that's had a very obviously had a big impact on the quality of those shows and how many people attend them. You're absolutely right. COVID came along and we all pivoted to virtual tastings.
Yeah.
And they are still very present. We, wearing my Scotch Malt Whisky Society hat, we still do those once a month, and they sell out almost every time. They're very well patronised, and they're a lot of fun. And we have a lot of members in the Scotch Malt Whisky Society in Australia who are not in our urban capitals. It's very difficult for them to come along to our meetings and our tastings in the city. So these virtual packs are great for them. They can be out in regional Australia and still join in the fun. So they're great from that point of view.
Now, what about you sent me a whole lot of the pictures on the different types of functions that you're finding. Like the curated ones, where like this one, for example.
Yeah.
And this one where it's obviously people are paying a pretty high price to have a one-on-one session. Are you finding that's more popular than the festivals and bigger, broader tasting sessions?
Well, those two photos you just showed were not actually public events. This sort of segues a little bit into one of the topics I thought that might be fun to express, is just how whiskey is marketed these days. This photo here and the one you had before it were very curated marketing ones, where brands paid, put a tasting on and invited a very select number of influencers to come along.
All right.
And that's how we're seeing whiskey get marketed these days. Everyone in that room there is a blogger. Well, we used to call them bloggers back when that photo was taken, an influencer of sorts. So that's something I was really keen to chat about and explore. And I don't want to sound like an old man looking wistfully in the past, but 20 years ago, and I used to do a lot of this. A lot of the brands used to approach me, and I would put an event on with them. 20 years ago, you would hire out a function room, you'd put word out on the street, you'd get 80, 90 people along into the room, and you'd have a wonderful, I suppose some people might call it a master class, but you'd have a whiskey tasting. And here in Australia, if one of the great whiskey luminaries from Scotland was doing a tour, you put an event on with them. So I've hosted some amazing events where we had 70, 80 people in the room. We had Jim McEwen from Brickladdie, we had Bill Lumsden from Glenmorangie, Ian McWilliam from Glenfarclas, mental blank, Dave, this is embarrassing, I can't think of his name, the former malt master at Balvenie came out. We did a big event with him. Brian Kinsman from Glenfiddich as well. And you would put liquid on lips. So you'd have 80 people in the room, everyone would get to taste something. And yes, it would cost a bit of money, but we would put those events on, and we would partner with a retailer, and you'd put order forms out, and everyone would actually get to taste it, know what they liked, fill an order form in, and the retailer would then supply those whiskies, and you had sales marketing in one hit. In 1 2-hour event, you had 80 people get to try the whiskey. They would place orders, buy stuff, walk out very happy, feeling that the world was a better place.
Well, that sounds like a really good idea.
They were fantastic ideas.
Yeah.
And this is the tragedy. We don't do that anymore. Most of the brands and distributors in Australia now jump to PR firms and say to the PR firms, we've got this new launch, we have this new product, we want to get out there, we want to tell the world about it, please help. And the PR firms are no longer organizing those old sort of events that I just described. What they'll do instead is put on something very lavish and special. They'll invite 10, 15, 20 influencers, and it's the influencer's job to then put word out on Instagram and use hashtags and hope that some people might see that, maybe go down to their local, alcohol retailer, maybe buy a bottle, and we don't know. And I've been invited to a lot of these events with 15, 20 influencers. I don't think we're allowed to call them influencers anymore. I think we're all now content creators. I think that's what we what we refer to ourselves as. And sorry, I say we because I do that wearing my Whisky and Wisdom hat.
Right.
But so I find it very interesting because if you're a big brand, if you're a Glenfiddich or a Glenlivet and you've done this, you go to the PR firm and you say, "Oh, right, well, how did our launch go?" And the PR firm will say, "Oh, well, we had amazing engagement. We had great engagement." What does that mean? So the content creators put out a post, they got lots of likes, lots of views. You can't tell or measure that someone scrolled up, hit like, and then went down to their bottle shop the next day and bought a bottle of it.
And I think the general consensus is that the conversion rate is about 0.5%.
Yeah.
So
well, what gets me a little hot under the cup.
It's like I just put up an Instagram post on why casks don't leak, and it's up to 90,000 views at the moment. But the number of views compared to the number of people who subscribe is ridiculous. It really is more like about 0.3%. And the marketing people I've talked to said that that's about what it translates through to when you're talking about sales. And also Amazon called me and wanted me to be an influencer on Amazon. And they told me the same thing. They said the conversion rate to sales is about 0.5%.
Well, what bothers me about it is that I've been to these events and I find myself sitting with other content creators. No, I can't stand whiskey actually, but my area is more fashion or shoes and clothing. But I got asked to come here. I'm being paid, so here I am. So I find it very insincere and not very authentic that the whiskey is now being marketed by people who actually have very little interest in it, don't even like the product.
Yeah.
But that's how measurable. We've turned likes and scrolls and views into the measurable KPI.
Yeah.
And so, as I say, the PR firms can go back to the brands and say, "Oh, we had amazing engagement on this campaign." But the engagement was with people who were following a fashion influencer.
It seems crazy to have influencers who don't like whiskey.
But the sad thing is, this is where the market's gone to. So we're no longer putting liquid on lips. We're no longer promoting and marketing directly to the people who we know are likely to go down to their local bottle shop and actually buy a bottle.
Yeah.
So, I wrote an article. If anyone wants to go to Whisky and Wisdom and read the whole thing, it was called "The Changing Face of Whisky Marketing," and it just sort of talks through this story about how we. And the funny thing is, people used to think, "Oh, putting on a big event costs money." It does. You've got to hire a function room. You've got to cater for it. You've got to get 80 through the door. It costs a lot. I've you hear and you chat to people about what they're getting paid to turn up to these little small curated things. And I think when you look at what they're paying some of these content creators to attend and join in the campaign, you get 10 people who might go out and Instagram it, or 80. And that's the other thing too. People are getting paid to go to these events, and your contract is to do 1 or 2 still posts and 1 story. And your story lasts 24 hours and it's gone.
Yeah.
When I go to these things, I often do a big write-up on Whisky and Wisdom, and I'll end up writing 900 words that are there forever. You can always go back to them and read the review, read the thoughts and all about it. So I found that both frustrating, depressing, and a bit bewildering that marketing has, when you look at why are sales of Scotch and whiskey in general going down, I don't think we're doing a great job of marketing it, because we're not putting liquid on lips like we used to.
Marketing it in completely the wrong market.
Yeah. And look, it's a chicken and egg thing, but people say, the younger generation's not drinking, so let's Instagram, great way to try and market to the younger generation. Again, there's a bit of tension there. I don't know. I don't have the answers, by the way. I'm very happy to whinge about it. I don't have answers, but I just know that, I don't know, we seem to have a more engaged, vibrant, positive community 15, 20 years ago, when everyone had the chance to taste it. We made whiskey very aspirational. All of a sudden, if a fancy bottling came out with a big age statement and a huge price tag, well, most people now, the closest they'll get to that is seeing it in an Instagram shot.
Yeah.
Once upon a time, we used to put that on a table and let people taste it. So yeah, we've moved, in my opinion, a long way off where we should be in trying to get whiskey people to engage with whiskey.
Yeah, that's a shame. Hey, I've got a message for you from David Ligoff. I'm going to put it on David Ligoff. I'm going to put it on the screen. Can you see it?
Not yet. I'm still seeing the photo of a Glenmorangie event.
Oh. Oh yeah, I see the Glenmorangie. I see the bottle in there.
I'm looking at my good friend Garth Foster and Matt Wooler there at the moment. Oh, and there's Anoka as well. Wonderful people. They are. These are the good people. There's a question. Just to clarify, the Whisky Show has only ever featured whiskey and liqueurs, not other spirits. There you go. Sadly, David, not everyone has been able to deliver that.
So there you go. Well, we've been yakking away here for an hour already.
Oh, that's a fast hour.
Yeah, I'm just looking for. I had a few questions that had been sent to me ahead of time. That's not it. And
just while you're looking for your question, I might just for the international, international to me anyway, maybe our American and European friends. There is some amazing Australian whiskey being made right now. It is a tragedy. It's not finding its way to your shores. I don't know how many Australian distilleries would actually ship overseas, but if you can get your hands on it, please do. We're making amazing stuff. There are some Australian distilleries that are deliberately going out of their way to make a spirit that is perhaps more Scotch-like. I never know whether that's an insult when you say to an Australian distiller, "Hey, your whiskey tastes like Scotch." Is that an insult?
I'd take it as a compliment.
I'll tell you now, the 2 or 3 people I'm thinking of take it as a compliment, because they're trying to do. Australian whiskey is very interesting. I said before, it's very hard to pigeonhole, but what we have done in this country, we now have sort of 2 different styles, and we have these wonderful euphemisms to describe them. We say that Australian whiskey is either spirit-driven or oak-driven. So the distilleries that are filling primarily into American oak and ex-bourbon casks, those distilleries are making whiskey where you can still taste the malt, you can taste the spirit. Oak and spirit are in good balance, and that's one camp. And you've got a lot of the other distilleries that are filling into ex-fortified, ex-wine casks and getting big, bold, juicy flavors out of those ex-wine casks. And so we use the euphemism for that is oak-driven. So I don't know if we at Consumerville are all sitting in one camp or another. I enjoy both styles. I'm very cautious when an Australian oak-driven whiskey just becomes a bit too oaky and we've lost sight of the malt, or if it becomes too tannic. But certainly, if people are exploring Australian whiskey, you'll find they'll generally tend to fall in one of those two camps. But please, folks, track it down. It's good juice, it's good spirit. As we said at the top of the program, it's winning amazing awards. Australian distilleries are punching well above their weight in most of the international spirits competitions at the moment, in the World Whisky Awards. It's good stuff. I on behalf of the industry, I apologize that we can't get our stuff out to you more readily, more easily. But
it's actually a shame, because I've got quite a few friends here who are whiskey drinkers, and a few times I've tried to find them. You can't find them anywhere. I mean, it's so hard. I know there are places selling them, but I'm based in Georgia, and you're not allowed to have alcohol shipped into Georgia. So, and there's a couple of other states where you can't have it shipped in. So it's really hard to get it. A friend of mine owns a winery out in Paso Robles in California, and she's wanted to send wine over, and she can't send it. They've got to have special licenses and God knows what. So that makes it even more awkward to get it, because even if you can find it in the United States, it's always difficult to get it shipped to you.
Yeah, well, I've spoken to a few of the larger distilleries, some of their reps, and they do lament that they're trying to crack the American market, and it's just proving very, very difficult.
Yeah, there's so many rules and regulations, and they change state by state. So and you've got to be licensed in every state. It's not like in Australia where you get licensed for the country. It's state by state by state, and in some places it's county by county, because where Jack Daniels is made, it's a dry county. You can't do tastings, which is pretty funny.
The closest we come to a dry county is the Great Australian Desert, but that's all right.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. Well, listen, mate, have I got any other things that I wanted to ask you? I've got notes all pinned all around the wall here, so that I wouldn't forget. And but I think we've answered all the questions that I was sent. And David still, I think he's still listening in. He said the challenge for Australia is that most big brands fall under the Asia Pacific regional office and get leftover crumbs of their marketing budgets for events.
Yeah, well, that's very true. Yeah. I mean,
I will ask you one last question about the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, because do you in the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, do you only have Scotch whiskies, or do you bring the Australian whiskies in as well?
We bottle casks from many different countries and spirits these days. So we have bottled some Australian whiskey.
Oh, right.
Yeah, we have two at the moment, and I can't say much more than that, other than that there are works in progress. The society turned a few heads many years ago when it bottled its first Japanese whiskey, and some of the old diehard rusted-on members said, "Oh, we're the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. Why are we doing bottling Japanese stuff?" And then they tasted it and realised how amazing it was. And we've bottled. Gosh, the list is goes forever now. Obviously, Irish whiskey, a lot of American whiskey. The society's now bottled a lot of bourbons and some Tennessee whiskies. Stuff from Europe as well. So yeah, all around. I think many years ago, it was obviously started as the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, but about 10 years ago, we realised there's some other amazing spirits and whiskies being made elsewhere in the world. Yeah. And I say spirits because we've also bottled Armagnacs and cognacs, rums, gins.
Oh, right.
So It's best thing these days.
Yeah.
This is a great photo here. I'm wearing a grey waistcoat in the middle there. The gentleman in this photo, the gentleman to the right is Chuck Hahn, one of Australia's best brewers. This was an amazing event we did with the Scotch Malt Whisky Society and the James Squire brand of beer. And that was a wonderful night, just demonstrating that whiskey pairs with beer very well. And Chuck Hahn, lovely bloke, an American originally. He's been in Australia since the 1980s. Just we were pairing different beers from James Squire to different society bottlings. And that was a great night. So great, in fact, we've done it 2 more times with Chuck since then. So we've done 3 with him in total.
Well, I tell you an interesting story is when I was living up in Maine, a mate of mine who I worked with on a film, he was a grip. He was living in Belfast, Maine, and opened up a brewery, and he made fantastic beers. And I didn't know that he was there until I went in one day, and he said, Rob Draper, and we sort of started talking, and he wanted to get whiskey casks to age his beer in. And so I said to him, well, I've got a lot of contacts in Scotland, so why don't we take some of your beers over and we'll get Charlie McLean to do a tasting of your beers, and then we'll get Andrew Rankin when he was with Bowmore, and we'll get him to taste the beers, and then the 2 of them can work out what are the best casks to put your beer in. And it was fantastic. We went over there. We were over there for a couple of weeks, and I think we got together with Martine Nouet, and she did some food pairing with the beer as well. But they ended up getting 6 casks that were shipped back to Maine, and the beers that came out of them were sensational. So it was, I know when you say they pair together really well, they actually do.
Yeah, well, and the society's actually put out a few releases where the spirit spent some time in an ex-ale cask. So we've done that well. You mentioned Martine Nouet there as well. We did a whiskey dinner with her in Sydney. So yeah, it's a big, vibrant community. There's always something going on, and we all know one another, and we all work together. And that's what I've really loved about the whiskey industry. I think we all recognise that. What's that saying? A rising tide floats all boats. So what's good for the industry is good for everyone in the industry. Let's be honest, the industry is struggling at the moment with the downturn in almost every metric you'd care to look at. So we need to band together even more and improve things.
Well, I'm going to ask you about one more picture that you sent me. This one, because that looks pretty spectacular there.
Yeah, so look, this was a Glenmorangie event for a launch of A Tale of the Forest, and just an example. Again, this was a big budget item, but this was that was a very curated list of people who got invited to that. Everyone there is somehow either in media or a content creator or a well-chosen distributor. It was a big event. They decked out an industrial space. Glenmorangie, courtesy of Moet Hennessy Australia, I always have a lot of time for. They do things well in this country, and when they put an event on, they do it well. And this was a great example of it. But as I say, it was a curated guest list. We were all expected to taste the drink and tell the world about it the next day, which I promptly did because it was a great whiskey and good people.
Well, I think we might start to wrap it up here, but I've got a couple of questions for you. What should enthusiasts look out for in terms of Australian whiskey in the next 1 or 2 years?
Well, there's always more distilleries announcing themselves. Sullivan's Cove won the big award in 2014. And that triggered a massive growth and spurt in distilleries being established, particularly in 2017 to 2020. So a lot of those distilleries have now got stock that's becoming in between 2 to 5, 6 years old, and they're now starting to bring out their debut release. So, something that's exciting at the moment is just, it seems every second month the new Australian distillery announces itself on the stage. So there's always new names you've got to become acquainted with. It's to be honest, the downside of that is it is becoming an increasingly crowded space, and every distiller is having to squeeze and muscle in to find their space on a very crowded shelf. But we're trying. But I think that's the interesting thing. There's always something new appearing.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. And I've got one more for you. This was a question that was sent in. You basically answered it in that one. What should enthusiasts look for? What would surprise people? And yeah, no, that's it. So the main thing is that that even though there's a downturn, even though young people are moving sort of slightly away, maybe it is just because of incomes. Maybe the Australian government and the US well, forget the US government, but the Australian government should give everyone a pay rise, and then they can spend more money on whiskey.
You just got your 5-second little grab for the promos for this. That'll go down well. But yeah, look, it's 5-6 years ago, interest rates in Australia were 3% for home loans and mortgages and the rest. They've doubled. They're now over 6%. So obviously, if you're paying off a mortgage, your repayments went up hugely. That drove up rent. So rent in the big cities in Melbourne and Sydney has gone up between 40 and 55% in the last 5 years alone.
Wow.
So, when we talk, it's huge. It's absolutely huge. So when you talk about a cost of living crisis, people just do not have the same discretionary spend they had 5 years ago. And as I say, you had Tim Duckett on the other day. He made the point that his regular customers who used to buy 2 bottles of everything or 3 bottles of everything are now only buying 1. The point is, Tim, they're still buying at least 1 bottle, so you're doing all right, mate. But there's plenty. Well,
that was what he said. He said at least they're buying 1 bottle.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So look, the cost of living is a big thing, certainly in this country at the moment. So that's just what challenges the industry has.
And I think that's challenging the industry everywhere too. It's not just in Australia.
Australian whiskey used to be very expensive. A lot of distilleries were putting out stuff in 500ml bottles with price tags upwards of $200 and $250 for stuff that didn't have an age statement. We've had a muchly needed market correction. A lot of distilleries have made a really tremendous effort to bring something to market at around about $100 to $120. There's a few players on the market that have got stuff at sub $100 now with malt whiskey at $99 and even a bit less. So we are competing against some of the Scotch alternatives now, options, I should say, better than we used to. Once upon a time, you had to, when you saw a bottle of 12-year-old single malt Scotch for $80 and an Australian bottle was $200, that was a tough ask. Now we've addressed that nicely. So that's obviously been great for the market.
Oh, that's good. Well, you know what? On that note, we might wrap it up.
Well, you can hear my voice. I think I've talked for about as long as I'm capable of. So, mate, it's been a pleasure. I said this the other day when we had our false start, but congratulations for getting Single Malt TV back up again. I remember filming something with you back in 2010, 2011. It's great to have you back on the world stage and doing what you do, because you do it very well.
Oh, thanks, mate. Yeah, no, it's been a long time coming, and I've sort of been. I sort of had a crack at it in 2018, but the timing wasn't right then. But I think now that the timing's good, and the response I've had from everyone has been fantastic. And the people I'm reaching out to come on and do live streams, I'm mainly going for personalities and interesting characters and people who are doing unusual stuff. But everyone's responded really well, so it's been quite encouraging. So I'm very happy about it.
Yeah, well, last word from me is just my apologies to all the viewers for my camera that has just been stuck and buggy and laggy for the whole stream. So my apologies.
Well, no, yeah, that's okay. At least you were moving a little bit and you weren't scaring David too much. Okay, well, I'll sign you off, and just stay on the line, and when I hang off, we can have a chat.
All the best. Thanks, folks.
Okay, thanks, mate. Really appreciate it, Andrew. That was awesome.
Bye for now.
Bye, mate. Okay, well, there we go. There's, oh, we don't want that picture. Thanks to Andrew. That was a fantastic hour, and sorry about the lag in the image there. I'm not too sure what that was, what caused that, and for some reason or other, it seems like Single Malt TV and David don't get on too well, or the cameras don't get on too well. But anyway, it was there was some fantastic information there, and I hope everyone enjoyed it. Stay tuned for on Friday. If you tune in on Friday, Saturday, 7 a.m. in Australia, we're going to be talking to David Ligoff about malt stock down under, and he's been standing by in the comments, giving us some comments here and there during each of these webcasts. But he'll be on Friday, March 6th, in 3 p.m. in the United States, 8 p.m. in UK, 9 p.m. in Europe, and 7 a.m. On the Saturday morning on the 7th in Australia, Eastern Daylight Time. So I'll wrap it up there. Thanks very much. I appreciate all the people who logged in and were watching. And again, our apologies for a little bit of lag in Andrew's image coming through from Australia, but the audio seemed to be good, so there was some good information there. So thanks, everyone, and I'll catch you on the next one, which will be Friday. Bye for now.